Hi, this is Sapna Bharti, and welcome to another episode of Weekly Wrap with Mike. Mike, welcome to the show once again. This week we have a lot of stories around open source. So let's start with you. Tell me, which is the first story you have picked?
So I'm going big on my first story, and we're going to think globally here. Source Code's David Pierce reported on an audacious climate plan Apple announced on Wednesday. According to Pierce, Apple says that by the year 2030, every device the company sells will have net zero climate impact. What's interesting, as Pierce points out in his piece, is that Apple's plan doesn't stop at the manufacturing of its devices. The goal, according to Apple, includes a cradle-to-grave approach for each device and includes things like renewable and recycled packaging, emission offsets, forcing its suppliers to use 100% renewable energy. Given Apple's size and weight in the global economy, its climate plan could have a far-reaching and positive ramifications on the environment. It'll also likely have a disruptive and, I would argue, positive impact on socioeconomic policies in countries where it does business. Ultimately, though, a company like Apple taking this kind of stand will force other companies in countries, and let's face it, Apple is effectively a country unto itself, to respond with their own plans to remain competitive. Lots of win here for humanity.
GitHub has kind of frozen open source code base in Arctic. In 2019, at the GitHub Universe, the company announced its ambitious GitHub Archive program and the GitHub Architect Code Vault. The idea was to preserve open source code buried under Arctic ice for thousands of years. Now, the idea looks great, should the humanity fall. I mean, if you look at pandemic, we don't know what will actually happen. And if you're a big fan of Walking Dead, once, our civilization collapsed and kind of we bounce back, the future generations might be able to see and use our work. That's a great idea. But the thing is that open source by design just doesn't die because it can live on people's personal devices. You can make copy and put anywhere you want. The challenge is with the proprietary code where only single company is responsible to maintain the code. But beyond that also, even if you look at from purely technological perspective, thousands years from now, this code will be obsolete. Code becomes obsolete just in a few decades. It's more or less like trying to open a floppy drive on an Oculus Rift or iPhone. It's obsolete, incompatible technology. So, we still don't know how pyramids will build, right? So 1,000 years from now, when somebody opens this vault, they're not going to use these obsolete technologies. So I really don't know the actual relevance beyond that. Okay, it's a great, fun move from GitHub to put all that code to be preserved for thousands of years.
There was a story by one of my favorite technology pundits, Rich Miller. It popped into my RSS feed this week. It was a story he wrote for Data Center Frontier about the impact the COVID-19 pandemic is having on colo facilities around the world. These locations are the central meeting places where all of our data gets magically exchanged between networks, cloud providers, and even everyday people. The pandemic has caused a meteoric rise in the volume of data traffic flowing through these network intersections. And it's only going to get bigger. Rich cited a report from the big kahuna in this space, Equinix, that projects global interconnection bandwidth will grow at something like a 51% compound annual growth rate through 2025. And that's huge. He also points out that this projection, while large, was made prior to the pandemic, so the growth is likely astronomically higher. What it means, is that we often take for granted the intricate plumbing that delivers all of the random bits to our devices. And as an industry, we've done good work at abstracting the complexity that makes our world possible. It's one of the reasons I think we're going to see a shift in our industry from, in the focus from apps to infrastructure, as this new world we're in puts increasing pressure on the plumbing of our house.
Snyk is making it easy to fix open source vulnerabilities. They have announced a developer first prioritization capabilities to help DevSecOps teams to prioritize fixes for security vulnerabilities in their open source code base. Now, as you also rightly said, that a lot of workloads are moving online. A lot of and most of these servers and cloud, most of them, not most of them, almost all of them run on open source, all the way from AWS to Linode. And because of this increase in consumption, there is also an increase in vulnerability discovered in open source code base. And unless you're using, poly versus polymorphism, you have to stay awake at night to keep up with the latest CVs. You don't know when that bug will break your app or make your users insecure. And Snyk also agrees that organizations today are kind of overwhelmed by the growing amount of vulnerabilities in the code base. And since they cannot fix each and every issue instantly, they must prioritize which ones are critical. I mean, Equifax is a very good example. That patch was not in the priority, and that's what created the whole mess. Now, what happens with the effective prioritization, that it helps organizations to stay focused on the vulnerabilities that pose the greatest risk. And it also maximizes the time and effort, the value of time and effort that you spend in fixing and maintaining the overall security of the organization. But the question is, how do you prioritize? How do you know which vulnerabilities must be fixed first? And that's where Snyk comes to your rescue. What Snyk is doing is they are providing a comprehensive suite of developer-friendly prioritization tools to enable organizations to effectively prioritize fixes for vulnerability in their open source code vulnerabilities. They are using a lot of technologies there to find which vulnerabilities are critical, which vulnerabilities are being used most. And then using this instant prioritization, you can very easily fix the application and keep your infrastructure secure.
Another one that's been pretty visible, and this is my last story for the week, is one that MarketWatch's Wallace Witkowski, he teased rumors swirling about Nvidia, a company that is on fire this year, that they might be pursuing a deal to buy ARM from SoftBank. Seems like everyone is chasing ARM, up in arms maybe, in some way or another lately. Ron Amadio at Ars Technica had a great take on the rumor. It's really good writing. So I'm just going to read it as Ron wrote it and hopefully do his voice justice. So it goes like this. Do you want to control the future of basically every mobile device on Earth, and even some laptops and desktops? Have I got a deal for you? ARM Limited is for sale, the company in charge of the ubiquitous ARM CPU architecture that powers the majority of devices that run on a battery. Man, I love that. It will only cost a few tens of billions of dollars, chump change. Bloomberg has two reports on the matter, one stating that Nvidia is interested in buying ARM, and another saying that Apple isn't. It's a great end to that piece. This is fun times, and it's still only summer in a pandemic year. So as the fall tech season gets underway, this is going to be, I predict this is going to be one of the top stories for people to follow.
The Linux Foundation has launched a new project called the Linux Foundation Public Health Initiative, and the goal is to increase the use of open source software in helping global public health agencies fight back against COVID-19 and prepare for future public health challenges. I mean, if you know Linux Foundation, they have become a massive organization that is catering to almost every industry. And what they benefit from is most of their members are functioning in more than one space. So the same player works in the mobile space, in energy space, and in the cloud space, and IoT space, in 5G space. So it makes it very easy for cross-pollination and collaboration. So this is really, and they are also good at picking the need of the hour and then launch a foundation there. The foundation is being led by Dan Kohn, who built a very successful Linux Foundation project called CNCF, for Cloud Native Computing Foundation. This foundation, the Public Health Foundation, already has 7 core members, including Cisco, Doc.ai, Geometer, IBM, Nearform, Tencent, and VMware. And as you see, Tencent, VMware, IBM, Cisco, they are already members of Linux Foundation's other projects. So it's just very easy for them to move members around and create new foundation. But the beauty is that that will enable to bring all the work that is being done separately in the healthcare space under one roof. And if you look at the influence the Linux Foundation has over many industries that overlap, it will be quite easy for them to build a very strong foundation in this space as well. And I remember I had an interview with Karen Sander because she uses a pacemaker, and she was, my life relies on this pacemaker, but I cannot access the source code of this pacemaker to actually see how it works. So maybe this foundation will actually enable to open source all these core technologies that our lives depend on.
I think it's a great bookend to the to the Apple story that we started off with, where these organizations and companies that we all know in our industry are starting to tackle larger problems, right? They're tackling things that are that have larger socio and economic impact on real humans and a larger world around us, more so than just straight up consumer or enterprise apps. And I think that's important, right? There's serious stuff going on, and some of these technology organizations and companies have the ability and the creativity and the technological know-how to help other people. And I think this is a great example of it. I think Linux Foundation, like you said, with all of the different touch points and industries and players that are involved in it, is a great place for some of that innovation and work to happen.
I fully agree. Mike, thank you once again for sitting down with me here and giving us a wrap of this week. And I look forward to talk to you again next week. Thank you.
Thank you, Swapnil.